Mpho Lakaje, thank you so much for joining us from Johannesburg. Just wanted to get a sense of what exactly the situation is on the ground. We have the numbers, but numbers don't really tell the real picture.
Well, Amitabh, let me just say that South Africa is currently sitting with 1,585 cases of COVID-19, and sadly, 9 deaths have also been recorded. It's important to remember that we have a population of 57 million people. The South African government has confirmed that most of the recorded COVID-19 cases were actually imported. In other words, these are South Africans who traveled to high-risk countries like Italy, Germany, Spain, the United States, etc. In fact, I remember our very first 2 cases were a couple from the coastal province of KwaZulu-Natal. They had visited Italy. They came back and tested positive. So the cases are largely imported, but we are also starting to see local transmissions as well. This is extremely concerning. You would imagine, because obviously to many South Africans, this can't be right. Look, compared to countries like Italy, who also have a population of approximately 60 million, the number of our cases is still quite low, but I can tell you that many people are extremely concerned about these cases. I mean, exactly a month ago, I remember, Amitabh, I was at a gathering with friends, At the time, we had only 2 reported cases. Many of us at the gathering were saying, nah, there's absolutely no need for us to worry. But a month later, here we are with over 1,500 cases, 9 deaths, and trapped in our homes. So it just shows you that quite a lot can happen in less than a month.
You're saying most of the cases initial were imported, people coming in from outside the country, and now you're seeing community transmission. You mentioned KwaZulu-Natal. Is that one of the areas, the provinces which has the most number of positive cases as well? And is there some kind of a pattern?
Well, there certainly is a pattern, but I would say that Johannesburg, where I am based, the Gauteng province, has the most number of cases. And that is attributed to many factors. For example, this is a densely populated province. That's number one. Number two, the Gauteng province is South Africa's financial capital. You are most likely to succeed in your personal goals when you live in a province like this one, because there's a lot of commercial activity. This is followed by the province of the Western Cape, and of course, lastly, the province of KwaZulu-Natal.
A lot of similarities, maybe not in the population numbers between India and South Africa, but say in terms of when the lockdown was put in place, 3 weeks again, both in India and in South Africa. Tell us a bit more about the measures that were taken once it was decided that the situation was extremely serious.
Look, when the cases started to rise, when it was becoming very clear that we are dealing with a serious situation that could easily spiral out of control, the South African government decided to introduce a number of measures to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Firstly, the borders were swiftly closed. If you are not a South African, you are not allowed to come in, but we've also made an effort as a country to get our citizens repatriated from other countries. For example, we had about 120 students trapped who were trapped in Wuhan, China, that particular region where the pandemic originated. Yeah, epicenter. Our government brought all of them back to South Africa and immediately quarantined all of them. The second measure, which has been effective, is ensuring that everyone who tests positive quarantines either at home or in hospital, depending on the severity of the case. Lastly, the government introduced a lockdown. Now, for us as South Africans, you would imagine, Amitabh, we are a country that is used to constitutional democracy and freedom. The idea of being jailed in our own homes, if I may put it that way, is quite foreign. In fact, it was initially rejected by many in some circles, including church leaders. But eventually, the government had everybody's buy-in. But we are, because we all understood the significance of the lockdown and why it is needed to be done as soon as possible. So, most importantly for us, we had already seen what the pandemic can do in countries like Italy, Spain, and France. So we were working with some sort of a reference, The army was also deployed to the streets of South Africa to help the South African police and to ensure that people comply with the lockdown rules.
So there was, at least initially, if not now, very strict enforcement of the lockdown. You mentioned the army. There are some reports of even firing. Are there fines, or if they find people on the roads, or how strict was it, and what's it like now?
When the lockdown was initially introduced over a week ago, it was fairly strict. In fact, I saw quite a number of videos emerging on social media, as well as mainstream media, videos of the South African army, sort of forcing people to get off the streets. Some people would be forced to squat, others would be forced to roll on the streets. Obviously those, I don't know if that is legal, but some people were arrested. Yesterday, I was watching the news, and the South African Police Service spoke about quite a number of people. We're talking thousands of people who've been incarcerated for violating some of these rules. So it's the South African government really takes this lockdown seriously. But I've also seen in the last few days, I would say in the last 2-3 days, the lockdown, some of the rules seem to have been relaxed a little bit. For example, you were not allowed to travel to another province for a funeral, but that has since been relaxed, and you can travel, you can go and bury your loved one. Say if you live in a province like Gauteng, where I am, I can travel to KwaZulu-Natal. There have been other things that have happened, like the taxi industry. Here we use minibus taxis. The majority of people of commuters rely on minibus taxis. Initially, I think it was something like 50. The taxi could only take 50% of its capacity, and now that has been increased to up to 70%. So whether that is good or bad, I'm not sure. But obviously, the government is trying to cater to the needs of the people, especially the poor. People who don't have their own modes of transport.
When you're talking about the government, again, there's a couple of similarities between South Africa and India is strong leadership from the top. Now, we've seen both President Ramaphosa and your health minister taking different roles, but have they been able to calmly and confidently convey the message and the seriousness of the situation? Because that's what it seems like from outside.
Well, I mean, okay, so let me answer the question in this way. You see, let me first say the impact of the lockdown is quite severe in a country like South Africa, because our economy was already battling before the lockdown. Now our economy is at a standstill. My wife, for example, operates in the tourism sector. She receives people mainly from Spanish-speaking countries. Her industry is virtually non-existent as we speak, especially now that the European Union has closed its borders. But fortunately for people like myself, journalists who work from home, you can continue making a living. Food delivery services have also been shut. Only essential services employees are allowed to work. These people include the police, the doctors, people who, in food production, supermarkets, journalists, etc. But the majority of people really aren't allowed to move. And this is a message that has been quite clear and quite strong from President Cyril Ramaphosa. Every week, he ensures that he speaks directly to the nation. This is something that is unprecedented, really. He speaks directly to the nation. He speaks about where we are as a country in as far as the fight against COVID-19 is concerned, but also the measures that the government continues to take to ensure that South Africa turns the tide or flattens the curve, as many would say. But the Minister of Health as well, Dr. Zweli Mkhize, also needs to take credit, really. And I've seen, just reading posts on social media and also just talking to different people, the general feeling is that the South African government seems to have this thing under control, I also read an article by one of the leading international media, and it truly painted a picture of a country that truly has moved swiftly to ensure that the pandemic doesn't spread, And also, let me add, Amitabh, that South Africa has also introduced other measures like mobile testing clinics. I
Yes,
saw,
yes, about
yes,
67, I think.
67 of those. I mean, and this is an
And
initiative.
drive-through as well, drive-through testing centers.
Drive-through testing centers, mobile testing stations, and the beauty of this initiative is that, these stations, have been taken to densely populated areas, because you would imagine a country like South Africa. I mean, we were planned around apartheid sort of thinking, So you've got areas that are densely populated and they're poor. So there are concerns that those areas, if this thing was to move into those sorts of areas, a lot of people could potentially be in danger. So these measures are quite good. And I remember the minister, Zweli Mkhize, said that the measures would enable the government to test up to 30,000 people a day. Now that's extremely important, because the more people you test, then the more you would get some sort of an idea as to where you are in as far as the fight against COVID-19 is concerned.
Mpho, when you talk about inequalities in societies, both in South Africa and India, are very similar. What are the measures that that the government is taking to make sure that the people who are hit the hardest, whether it's a daily income, whether it's food that they need, that's provided? And are there any budgetary measures that are being taken, say putting money directly into the poor households or tax relief of any sort?
All right. Let me answer your question in this way, Amitabh. So South Africa, as I said, is a country of 57 million people, and nearly 30% of our population is unemployed. Now, you see, that's quite severe. This speaks to high poverty levels in this country, and with things like poverty, poverty feeds to other social ills like crime, etc. So a lockdown of this nature obviously has a massive impact on society. One of the things that we saw when this lockdown was initially spoken about was a few donations from major business leaders in South Africa. I remember the first business leader pledged 1 billion South African rands. He was followed by another one who also pledged the same amount. And a few others have since come on board, to pledge substantial amounts of money. And that money is aimed at ensuring that if you are a small business operator and you have been severely affected by the lockdown, at least you can have some sort of a grant and be able to continue, to pay things like rent, to pay your employees, etc. So there are, measures like those. But I'm also seeing that, the lockdown has also been relaxed a little bit to ensure that people can also go to the shops. Poor people can also, people like hawkers who rely on selling on the streets. Such people, if you've got a permit and you can show that permit to the police, you are allowed to be out there and to continue to trade. So those are some of the measures. But I would say that the big business has played a significant role in ensuring that the impact of the lockdown isn't as severe. It still is severe, no doubt about it. I mean, our economy is at a standstill, and it's going to be interesting how the South African government is going to respond post the COVID-19 period. I can tell you already that our economy has already been downgraded by rating agencies. All our banks, 5 of them, have also been downgraded to junk. I mean that is severe, especially in a time like this. So it's going to be interesting how things are going to happen post the COVID-19 episode.
Mpho, just picking up from the points that you were bringing up there, the view from the outside again is that the South African government usually is looked at as very inefficient. There have been corruption scandals. When you look at your private sector, it's looked at in terms of being extremely capitalistic oriented or greedy, if you could call it that. Would you say that this huge crisis, almost war-like crisis, if not bigger than that, has brought out the best both from the government and the private sector?
Well, you are quite right. I mean, the South African government doesn't have a wonderful picture, doesn't have a good image, in among many South Africans, and some of it's precisely because of some of the things that you've mentioned: corruption, inefficient, issues in as far as the fight against crime is concerned. A battling healthcare system, a battling education system, high unemployment levels, high poverty levels. If also just to give you a picture of we are as a country, you would remember that when President Thabo Mbeki was still at the helm, the ruling African National Congress received an overwhelming 67% of the voter share. Now, last year we had our general elections, and President Ramaphosa received 57%. Now, from a 2/3 majority of 67% to 57%, that drop tells you that not many people are as excited about the African National Congress government as they have been in the past. And obviously this, as I say, is attributed to a whole lot of things that haven't happened well, particularly corruption. But with that said, I think that this pandemic is also serves as some sort of a litmus test for the current government. And if I were to speak subjectively, I would say that the way the ANC government has dealt with the pandemic so far, truly has done itself a huge favor, because a lot of people, even people who generally disagree with the ANC, have said that the government has actually done quite well. Even other countries. I mean, as I said earlier, a BBC report has made it very clear that South Africa moved swiftly, and they moved with the right pace. They did the right things at the right time.
The headline in BBC also mentioned the word mercilessly, moving mercilessly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They used words like ruthlessly. South Africa is dealing with this pandemic ruthlessly, and that's correct. I mean, 67, testing stations, mobile testing stations, 30,000 people being tested every day. I mean, those are fantastic measures, really, compared to other countries. And as I say, I mean, we are obviously using countries like Spain and Italy and the United States as reference, of what this pandemic can do if you don't move and you don't do the right things at the right time. But also, I mean, you spoke about the economic model, for example, South Africa being seen as being capitalistic. I think, if I were to look at the South African system, I would say we are, a mixture of the two. We are a bit capitalist, but also socialistic as well. Because you look, for example, at the production of electricity. I mean, it is at the hands of the government, but also our private sector is quite vibrant, So ours is a mixed economy, and that is also playing itself out as we continue to find the pandemic. I saw, for example, some of the private hospitals voluntarily deciding to nationalize themselves to ensure that they contribute in fighting this pandemic. So it's quite interesting, because this is not just a South African phenomenon. I'm seeing it in other parts of the world, where countries are voluntarily adopting a socialistic sort of approach in the fight against this pandemic. So yeah, we will see. I would say the next 2 to 3 weeks will be quite important in telling whether or not South Africa will flatten the curve.
Those 2 to 3 weeks, and whether the curve is flattened, how worried are you and other South Africans about the healthcare system? Does it have enough to cope with the curve not being flattened? Equipment, both in terms of medicines, equipment, and manpower, the healthcare workers who are on the front line.
No, No, you see, I'll tell you, the if this pandemic was to get particularly into poorer areas and densely populated areas, I can tell you the South African healthcare system would be burdened in a way that you cannot imagine. And I would imagine that the South African government would want to avoid that sort of situation. And, you know, I mean, one of the things that have since happened, and this has had a positive effect, things like the banning of the sale of alcohol during the lockdown. This has been extremely important, Amitabh, I can tell you. And I'm saying this because let me quote one doctor who said, you know, in the last few days, he usually receives a number of casualties in his ward. And we're talking here about severe cases of people who've been stabbed, people with gunshot wounds. He said since the lockdown was implemented, he hasn't received any. So, you know, you can see that, you know, forcing people to stay at home actually enables the healthcare system to actually deal effectively with this sort of thing. So, but I mean, if you were to ask me, you know, the South African healthcare system has been battling. Remember that other than South Africans, other than our own population, we also have massive numbers of people from across the SADC region, you know, who have left their countries for either political reasons or for, you know, other social reasons. And those people are all here, you know, and you would imagine that, you know, South Africa's healthcare system wasn't built to take such huge numbers. So, of course, you know, if all of a sudden we had to admit thousands of people daily, I think we would battle in a big way. But as I say, the measures that have been put in place so far seem to have assisted quite a bit. And I've got no doubt that if things continue, if we continue to see the current trajectory, I think we will be flattening the curve very soon. I don't know if I'm being optimistic, but I'm looking at the measures that are in place, and my subjective opinion is you know, is formulated by these measures.
Right, and you were talking about how important it is for people to stay at home and social distancing. And I think if I get a quote from your health minister correct, he was trying to send the message out by saying that if people don't stay 1.5 meters away from each other, they will have to be actually 1.5 meters down into the ground. He was trying to, you know, talk about the gravity of the situation. Mpho Lakaje, again, thank you so much for giving a sense of what's happening there. And again, do stay safe, brother, with you and your family. Thanks.
Thank you, Amitabh. Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity.